I have insurance, and so I don't need to focus on anything else other than just my physical well-being, because a bike is completely replaceable. And the fact that you have insurance and that you're protected and you're covered, all you need to do is focus on yourself and getting yourself better. Like, I'm going to try and I'm going to take risks and I'm going to take chances, because why else? Why would you not, right? I'm Alicia Speak. I'm 37. I'm a full-time lawyer, but I'm also a cyclist for Cycle Team London.
It's getting a bit busier in here. Good, right, listen, our next guest is someone who grew up in the wilds of mid-Wales, but left that to come and work as a courier here in the urban metropolis. So she knows London pretty intimately. She then swapped that a few years back to then riding right across Europe to some great success as well. And more recently has been writing about her exploits in 2 books, one of which is about to come out very soon. So please put your hands together for Emily Chappell.
Hi.
Emily, really lovely to see you. We will get on to knowing this city intimately in a minute, but you grew up in mid-Wales. So how did you then start to think about leaving Wales for, as I did actually, as it happens, both come from Wales, leaving Wales to come and ride in London? Because there couldn't be a more stark contrast in your riding life than that.
Well, you make it sound like it was a plan. It really wasn't. I left Wales for university, and then when I left university, I moved to London with no job or place to live, and it was a very stupid idea. Wasn't a cyclist at that point at all. And London was terrible. I don't know if anyone here has memories of their first few months after they moved to London. It was just awful and exhausting and expensive and bewildering. And for some reason, I decided I wanted to be one of these nutters who I'd seen riding around London. I wanted to commute by bike. And once I started doing that, that was when the city really opened up for me. And I discovered how it all connected. And very quickly, I began to feel like, okay, I know what I'm doing now. I understand this place, I know how it fits together. I feel like I can handle it, I can manage it. And it just went from there. And eventually I became a cycle courier, and then I really, really got to know it. And it was just this ongoing sense of, oh my goodness, I'm capable, I can handle the world, and I know it.
Did the studies go out of the window in favour of the couriering, or did you finish those and then get into doing that job?
Effectively, yes. So I started couriering just after my master's, and I was planning all along that I would apply for PhD funding and go and live in an ivory tower somewhere and
doing what kind of researching? What kind of subject were you studying?
At the time, I was studying South Asian literature, which was really great. Though I think had I gone into that as an academic, I wouldn't be as happy and fulfilled as I am now. And then I failed to get PhD funding. I thought, oh well, let's just keep myself ticking over while I go through another round of applications. And in the end, that idea just kind of died off because I was having such a good time on my bike. And I had thought when I took up couriering that it would be, farewell to the life of the mind. Now I'm a manual labourer. I'll just do this very simple, basic job, and maybe one day, eventually, I'll get to do something intellectual again. And it was actually completely the opposite. It was almost as though my mind really came to life when I became a courier, which is not what you'd have expected at all.
Because you talk to black cabbies in London, they're always banging on about doing the knowledge and how their brains are wired up differently to everybody else's, and they can sort of visualise how this sort of city which is a collection of villages really is all merged together. Do you feel that the same happens when you're a courier as well? You sort of join the dots that people don't do if they're getting around by tube or by bus or, dare I say it, driving their car?
Yeah, very, very much. And I don't know if it's the same as cabbies, because when I was a courier, a few friends of mine were in the process of doing the knowledge to become cabbies. I mean, not many people do it, but there is a bit of career progression between couriering and then, you grow up, you get a car.
You get lazy.
So I used to sit on the corner between jobs and test a mate of mine on the knowledge. And the way they do things is they learn all these different runs. So it'll be left on this street, right on this street, straight over, left on this street, straight over, destinations on your right. And I think they saw the map in their head a lot more as well. One thing I noticed as I was getting into couriering, getting better at it and thinking a lot, because I always do, I realized I don't picture the map at all. And actually, if you show me a map of London, it's not as familiar to me as you'd think, and I have to think about, okay, that must be there. It's not even as if I see it, it's an instinct. So if, when I was a courier, you could give me a job here and say, okay, you're going over to Spitalfields to this address, and then I'd get on my bike, and it would just sort of happen. It wouldn't be a conscious thing. It would be, I know where I'm going, so when I get to a certain point in the road, I know I have to turn left. When I see a certain blue shop sign, I know I have to bear right. And then when I see this, I know I have to unclip my foot and lock up my bike and go in the building. And it's not a conscious thing. And I think if I were to do the knowledge or something, I could probably quite easily convert it into something conscious. But a lot of the time, it was just this beautiful instinct that I developed.
When I started riding around London about a decade ago, I'm pretty sure we crossed paths at some point. You know, you go to those cafes, which you know at the time were cycling friendly, and you'd bump into other cyclists and have a coffee, and I'm sure we did that. But I was never that cool, to be honest. The fact is that couriers have always been cool. Were you aware? Even though, you know, you said some people would perceive it as being someone doing, you know, a job of manual labour, that actually to other cyclists who are not doing what you do day in, day out in all weathers, occasionally on fixed gear bikes, that there was an air of coolness about that.
Oh, God, yeah, because before I was a courier...
You thought they were cool?
Yeah. I just really wanted to be one because they were so cool. I was one of the cyclists like, yeah, I think I might give that a go one day. And if I hadn't got into it, I would now be someone who said, yeah, I always thought I might give that a go.
That's me.
Yeah, well, that so easily could have been me. And I mean, when you're doing it, you do realise all the things that are uncool about it. For a start, you know, you're always broke, because as soon as you have a little bit of money, you have to buy new tyres or something. You know, you spend shocking amounts of money on your bike, and you don't earn that much to start with. You always smell. You're often dressed in really old, ragged clothing that smells. And you're often wet and cold and miserable. And there's a certain indignity to it as well, because, you know, in some ways you don't have very much control over what you're doing. You know, you might sit there on a slow day for more than an hour with no jobs coming in, thinking, I'm ready to earn money, I want to work, and there's no work. I'm just sitting here wasting my time. Where is my self-respect? But also, the good sides are amazing. You know, it's such a high riding around London and knowing it well and being physically capable. Like, the feeling of being good at something takes a long time to get there, but it's exhilarating when you have it. And on a good day, you just feel like you're gliding through the city, you're surfing through all the obstacles, you see your mates all the time, so you're kind of riding along going, hey! And there were moments where I thought, oh my God, I finally achieved cool. I'd better make the most of this. It is not going to last. This is probably my peak. So, yeah, you know, there were times where I felt like I was really cool, and then inevitably I'd fall off at a crossroads with lots of people going past. I'd be tangled up in my bike. I wouldn't actually be able to stand up, so they'd have to help me, and that would be embarrassing. So it always came before a fall.
What bike did you do it on? Was it a fixed gear?
Yeah.
Why? Why specifically?
Well, because that was the bike I had when I started, and it was never a very conscious decision, but it sort of happened, and it was principally because it's a very easy bike both to ride and to maintain, so there are fewer components to replace, and also it's quite a simple kind of black or white thing. Like, if you're on a fixed gear bike, if it's broken, it's really broken, because the only things that break are, like, you know, your rims or your chain or your brake cable, and those are pretty important. Whereas if you're on a geared bike, a lot more stuff can go wrong that you can kind of live with, so you find you're riding along on a bike where everything kind of rubs and grates and it's unsatisfying. But with a fixed gear bike, it's broken or it's not, and if it's broken, you fix it, and if it's not, you keep going.
Just to finish off on the couriering, do you remember the best day you had couriering? Do you remember the biggest ride you did, or the most satisfying bit of work you did when you were doing that job?
I can never do superlatives. Like, if I say one day is the best, I'll feel guilty about all the other good days. There are a few really good ones. There was one day, and I was never the fastest courier. Like, if I boast about fast rides I did, a couple of people here will say, well, when I was a courier, I was way faster. There was one day where I can't remember where I went from. It was somewhere kind of the centre of the city, like maybe, I don't know, Holborn or something. And I got out to Canary Wharf in like 10 minutes. I remember it because it was such a good ride. I was feeling strong, the lights were in my favour, the traffic parted for me, and I got there and I delivered the package, and I really enjoyed calling in on the radio to say, right, you know, I've dropped off the package, I'm free now, and listening to the visible double take in my controller's voice. Oh, all right, great, come back in. And that was a happy little moment. And I remember looking at the skyline after that and thinking, I went from there to there in that really small amount of time. But the really good days, there are so many. I'm remembering one that I remember quite well because I think I blogged about it. And it was just riding around in the sunshine. Everything feels good. You have a few nice little episodes that happen. You see people you know. You have a nice coffee. You get a really satisfying run of jobs where, you know, you'll have a few in a good order to pick up, and then as they come in, a few more will go out, and you have this sense of the process working really well, and your bike's not broken, and those days were really, really satisfying.
When did the mind start to wander then to perhaps leaving that world behind and, I suppose, in some ways broadening your horizons when it came to your cycling life?
I can remember the day. It was the summer of 2010, but there were a few particular days that I now recall were part of that. So there was one day where I went into Brixton Cycles to replace something on my bike, and I had my usual rant about, I don't know why my bike keeps breaking. And someone kindly said, you ride it quite a lot, you know, you do high mileage as part of your job. And I grumbled and accepted that. And started thinking, I wonder what mileage I actually do. You know, I had a vague idea. I knew it was about 300 miles a week. And I thought, I must have done so much by now. I wonder what would happen if, rather than just drawing this line around central London, I stretched it out. Like, I wonder how many times around the world I've cycled. And this little light bulb appeared. I thought, I wonder if I could cycle around the world. And so there were a few more little light bulb moments that summer. And in September 2011, I set off to cycle around the world. In the end, I got as far as Japan and came home. So, you know, the world still awaits. But the 18 months I spent cycling across Asia were, oh, that's me, were just wonderful. Like, not only a high point in my life and a wonderful process to go through, but just I realized I'm really happy being on the bike every day. I'm really happy doing long distances and seeing the world change around me as I go.
It sounds like it could be expensive. So that eking out that existence on sort of the meager income of a courier, did that stand you in good stead for then just riding off around the world and doing that in a frugal fashion?
Pretty much, yeah. There were a lot of ways in which I think couriering really became the bedrock for everything I've done since. So yeah, I mean, I'm used to not doing anything that fancy and just, you know, eating from supermarkets and being aware of how to keep myself going as efficiently as possible. And then just simply getting up every day and going out on your bike. Because when you're a courier, it's your job, you have to do it. You can call in sick, but then you will not make any money, so you can only do that a certain number of times. So if you wake up and it's pouring with rain outside and it's a Thursday morning and you're exhausted and you have a slight hangover and period pain and a sore knee and all of that, you still have to go out. And it ceases to even be a decision you make. It's just, well, this is what I do. And I think that's stood me in really good stead for the endurance racing, because you spend less time asking yourself the question of, should I be doing this? Is there a way out of it? Do I want to stop? It's just what you do. You just get up and go.
There's more of a level playing field between men and women in endurance racing, isn't there? As we've seen with you winning, we've seen this year as well. Does there come a point where you think, actually, this really is just a battle of wills more than any sort of physical advantage men may have over women in riding a bicycle?
Yes, I think there's quite a lot to it. So I know there's been a lot of research that has generally proved that women have, you know, significantly higher endurance capacity than they do kind of, you know, basic sprint capacity and all of that. And that's all very interesting. But I think with races like the long self-supported ones, the transcontinental in particular, the skill set is actually quite different. So for a start, you know, a big part of it is you plan your own route. you can give yourself a big advantage by just planning a really good route and being really efficient with that and looking at things like gradients and wind direction and the most direct route and weighing up, should I take the direct gravel road through the mountains or the longer flat road and all of that. And that doesn't have anything to do with, your muscle mass or anything like that. But I think also, so my theory on long distance racing is if you look at these races, everybody gets to day 3 and has a bit of a crisis. Day 3 or day 4 is typically really rubbish. You just have a really hard day. Most people have gone through this at one point or another. And I have actually read some research recently into expeditions in general that says from a mental and psychological point of view, day 4 is the low point. And that actually kind of tallies with the day 3 thing, because I remember that on the Transcontinental, it's a late night start, so you've not slept. So actually, day 3 in the race is kind of day 4 that you've been without sleep. And my theory is that it takes you that long to work yourself into this state of exhaustion, sleep deprivation, and near injury that you then have to nurse yourself through the rest of the race in. So it's not really about strength and skill. I think everyone who enters a race like that, who is remotely a contender, are probably within the same band of, extreme physical fitness. I remember looking around at people at the start and thinking, well, here's Christoph Alchert, we know he's probably going to win. But I wonder, is his VO2 max better than all these guys? Are his muscles bigger? I mean, it's hard to say. I think we're all much of a muchness. I think it's much more about how you then cope for the next 10 days, whatever it is, when you've got to keep yourself going when you're completely wrecked.
And we're talking about this because having embarked on that round-the-world ride that, as you say, ended in Japan, you then obviously got a taste for that really long distance, that ultra-endurance kind of riding, and it just so happened it coincided with the launch of the Transcontinental race as well, which I think the first one was from Belgium to Istanbul, if memory serves.
London to Istanbul.
I beg your pardon, London to Istanbul. It's a slightly different route, well, certainly very different this year, going east to west instead. But the premise of it, for those of you who don't know, is you have to hit certain checkpoints through the route. Now, you can figure out your own way of doing that, and they're not all just in a straight line between London and Istanbul. There's one over here and one over there. And so there is an art to planning your route. But was it the first one that you did? Was it in 2015?
I ignored it for 2 years because I was not into that sort of thing and not interested. And then I realised that there must be a reason I was ignoring it, and I did the third one.
You did the third one in 2015. Exciting, nerve-wracking, because it didn't quite go as planned in the end.
No, it was very exciting and nerve-wracking. The build-up over the 9 months between getting the place and doing the race was one of the big learning curves of my life. Because when I got the place in the race, I hadn't really ridden a road bike very much at all. I was still on my fixed gear bike. All the big distances I'd done had been on fixed. And I look back at that now and think, how did I do that? Like 400k on fixed, who could do that? So I got a road bike, and that was a bit scary in itself. And then, figured out some sort of training program, which in my case was just do big miles, keep going. And then the race itself, until the race started, I was kind of overflowing with nerves. And as soon as I got going, I thought, oh my God, no, it's just riding my bike, and I love this. As soon as we left Gerardsbergen, I was on dark roads on my bike. All I could see was, the light in front of me. I could feel the night around me. It was fine. That's one of my happy places. It was wonderful. And I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected and thought, no, this is just what I do. This is enjoyable. And then, of course, I got a bit overexcited and thought, I'm really good at this. Let's just stop sleeping. And you can imagine how that went. So I battled my way across northern Italy, trying not to sleep and failing quite regularly.
Did you fall off?
No, I just stopped very often and lay down for 10 minutes and thought, I'm so weak. And then eventually I got to Slovenia, stopped for a longer sleep. I woke up with really strong pains in the left side of my chest and thought, this is a very good reason to go to hospital. And it turned out I was absolutely fine. They did all the relevant tests. There was nothing wrong with me. They said, well, we think we should maybe cycle a bit less and sleep a bit more. So I stopped racing and went home. But I'd had such a good time. I knew I was going to go back. I knew very clearly that I had got it wrong this time, but I had learned a really good lesson and that I would get my sleep right in future. And as soon as I stopped, I knew I was going to come back the following year.
And you came back with a vengeance, and you came back the following year, and you actually won it. And was that the plan? Was it the plan to actually go out and genuinely compete? Because plenty of people do those races, and they just want to get through it, which is an achievement in itself. But did you go with the eye on the prize?
Not consciously. I wouldn't have dared to let myself think that. But I think, obviously, on some level, you enter a race, you at the very least have a little fantasy about winning. So, yeah, on some level. But I think honestly, didn't know how I would measure up to the other people in the race. Partly because I just hadn't done enough of this sort of thing with other people yet to have a sense of where I was. And partly because most of the women and the men in the race I didn't know, I hadn't ridden with, they were unknown quantities. You have no idea. A lot of it is about who is there on the day. And I mean, to be very honest about this, there are a lot of people in the world who, had they been in that race, they would have won and I would not have. So to a certain extent, I got lucky with the field. But yeah, I'm not going to pretend it hadn't crossed my mind at all.
If there is one thing that made you succeed where others didn't quite measure up, what do you think it was?
Experience.
The failure the year before?
A lot more than that. Particularly that. Something I noticed during the rides where I was consciously preparing for the race was I was really embracing like the bad times I had, because I was thinking, right, well, this is good because I learned from this. So one example is a horrible ride I had. I used to go up and down to Manchester from London just to, hurt myself. And I had a really bad night going through the Peak District once, and I stopped in Leek. In a Costa. In fact, I stopped half an hour before the Costa opened and just stood outside waiting for it to open, and then sat at the back of Costa for 2.5 hours just drinking coffee and falling asleep and feeling awful. And then as soon as I got back on the bike, I felt great. And I thought, my God, I should have just had a coffee and got back on. But that was a really good lesson. Like, stop, have a coffee, get back on. It was fine. In future, I will save myself 2.25 hours there. So there were little things like that. And I remember the morning before I finished, so 24 hours before I finished the race, I was in Greece. I'd just ridden through the night and I'd stopped for coffee and pastries and things. And I remember as I got back on my bike, I'd figured out, okay, it's about 300k to the finish. And I can do that in a day. I've done that loads of times. And I had this really weird rush of, oh my God, I am going to make this. Because I've done 300k loads of times. I've ridden for 24 hours loads of times. I've ridden through the night loads of times. And actually, all of the challenges that are now going to come up in the next 24 hours, I was under no illusions. Like, I knew it would be very hard, and it really was. But I've done so many hard things now. I've been through so many bad times on the bike. I'm almost certainly going to make this. It seems very unlikely that this is going to be the one hard time I can't get through. Like, I've dealt with all the mechanicals and bad moods and bad weather and hills, so I'm probably going to make this. And it was a really significant moment in my life, because we spend so much time thinking, oh, what if I can't? And this was this one powerful moment where I thought, oh, no, I think I can.
The reason we're talking about this now is because Emily's put pen to paper for the second time for her new book, Where There's a Will. I think it's out next week.
Yeah, but there's copies here.
The copies here. I think you're going to be signing them very shortly. And there's also a really good snippet actually on the Rouleur website from when you crossed the border from, I think, Serbia into Montenegro, and you effectively, on your bike, tiptoed across because you could see a police officer there. You weren't sure if they were asleep, weren't sure if they were. They did spot you, but they let you go in anyway without checking your papers. It's a marvelous read. And just to finish up, Emily, is this going back to those sort of literary roots that you, I guess, started at university here in London? And was that another love of yours, the written word and writing it yourself too?
Yeah. Childhood dreams. When I was a child, I wanted to ride in the Tour de France. And I had this fantasy that I would, and that I would dress myself up as a man with a bad moustache, and call myself Emile Chappell. This did not come to fruition, but I also dreamed about writing books. I always wanted to be an author. And as you often do, I lost my way in my 20s. I got to university and thought everyone else is way cleverer than me, completely stopped doing any sort of creative writing. And I thought that being an academic was going to be my way into the world of literature. And as I was saying before, when I became a courier, it seemed completely the wrong way around. But actually, I started being a proper writer. I started writing, I started blogging, I had loads to say. And cycling has been this really weird complement to my writing. It's as though it's finally brought my mind to life. So certainly, like, the 2 degrees in literature and the years of reading books in libraries have helped. But really, it's cycling that made me a writer.
And quite aside from talking about the book and signing copies very shortly, you can buy them, of course, what is next? What's next on the agenda for the cycling side of things?
I don't have any big races or expeditions planned at the moment, so this is always a tricky question to answer. I'm doing a heck of a lot of audaxing, so I think racing and being competitive was something I needed to get out of my system, but was ultimately not very me. But I've realised that riding a very long distance on my bike, preferably through several nights with a lot of cake stops, is just what I like to do with myself. So I'm telling people that if this were a romantic comedy, Audax would be the reliable best friend who was there all along and turns out to be the love of my life.
Brilliant. That's a brilliant point to end it. Ladies and gentlemen, Emily Chappell. Thank you very much. Do stay where you are. In a moment, we'll be hearing all about it's genuinely life-changing for many riders, the Dave Rayner Fund, the story of how it began and how many famous names they've helped over the years. Dave Rayner Fund coming up next. For now, thanks a lot.